Morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today at the launch of Mind's Lived Experience Strategy. We are very, very excited to have you join us as part of this event and this conversation today and share a bit about our work and talk a bit about reform and the role of lived experience going forward. My name is Katie Larsen and I'm the Senior Manager of Strategic Reform at Mind Australia. And before we begin today's discussion, I'd just like to invite and welcome Auntie Di to perform a welcome to country. Thanks, Auntie.
Thank you. I honour my ancestors and my elders, and I pay homage to all the sacred grounds that we're on. I wish to acknowledge any elders of different nations, any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, any First Nations peoples from across the waters, and I acknowledge you all and I pay my respects to your ancestors and families. It's an honour and a privilege to be able to do the welcome today, and I've been I suppose a friend for a few years now of mine, and still getting to understand a little bit, but you know, I plug you all and tell people about what you do. And you know, especially at the moment when people have really serious health and well-being problems because of the lockdown, and you know, some of our elders are being triggered because of being on missions. They're growing up, you know, we know our children, and having to have permits to go off the mission. We have to have permits to go to work and all that. Things have changed now, but the a lot of our elders are still scared to go out. I pick and choose. The second time I went out, I had to get a COVID test because of whoever I was with was positive. So it's still a bit scary. So we still need to remember to look after each other. And congratulations on your strategy. That's awesome. I know you fellas work really hard, but I hope that you have a good day today. And, you know, the sun's shining. We have a few grey clouds, but the sun is shining, you know, positive for all of us. Get that vitamin C and D and everything in us. You know, it's really important. So I hope that we can all catch up soon. You know, once again, we're on Zoom, but, you know, it's actually sometimes very good because more people can attend, whereas they couldn't before, and businesses are saving money on travel. And I think it's really good that we can do this. You know, strange world to us elders, but at least we can do it. So can I just say, may Wunjil, our creators, surround you all and give you strength and resilience. Woman Jika, Wurundjeri, Balik, Human, Gundibik. That means welcome to Wurundjeri country. For those that aren't on Wurundjeri country, I can't welcome you to the country you're on, but I can acknowledge the country and hope that their elders and ancestors surround you and keep you safe as well. So Nungodjin, that means thank you. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of your journey today, and I wish you all luck. Nungodjin.
Thank you so much, Auntie. Always an absolute pleasure to have you with us, and thank you for all your support.
Thank you.
Thanks, Auntie. So thank you very much again for being part of the discussion today. You can engage with us through the chat, and there'll be time for questions later in the discussion. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers who we're very grateful to have with us today, and we're going to have a really dynamic panel discussion later in the event, which I'm really looking forward to. I think I just wanted to note, as we have the discussion today, the role of the lived experience movement in bringing us to where we are. As someone with a lived experience, engaging in that through my work and understanding how we can contribute insight, expertise and knowledge through the work of the lived experience movement, and really bring that into work. Our work is an opportunity to reframe our experiences as strength, as knowledge, as insight, and I think it's a real privilege to have the opportunity to do that, and I really appreciate the work of decades of work that has contributed to bringing us here today. At Mind, we are and have always been committed to the community mental health sector and how we work people within their lives every day around recovery, human rights, and lived experience-led solutions. The concepts of the strategy developed from the idea that we have a long history and in delivering lived experience-led approaches at Mind, but we saw that there was opportunity for us to do more and to move from it working across parts of the organisation and components of what we do to really centering it in our organisational strategy and really committing to drive and shift change in the way that we bring lived experience to the centre, in the way we make decisions, in the way we lead, in the way we deliver services, in the way we design services, and in the way that we communicate across the sector more broadly. In developing the strategy, it has been a work of collaboration and consultation, working with our lived experience workforce, our lived experience advisory team, our senior leadership, and also leaders across the sector. And I thank every single one of you who has been involved in this process to date, because it is the work of many ideas and insights, and the process of actually developing it really brought to light how much wonderful experience we have within the lived experience movement. So to launch the strategy, I'd like to, and share a bit about our vision and approach, I would like to welcome Mind CEO, Jill Callister.
Thanks, Katie. Thank you to Auntie Di. I know she's gone, but what a beautiful welcome. I would also like to acknowledge I'm joining you from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So this is a pretty important day for us, and I hope more broadly for the leadership of lived experience across the whole system. This is a piece of work that's been in the making for a long time, and I think sets the scene for us to go from where at Mind we've been very engaged with the voices of lived experience to a whole new level, and hopefully system leadership as well. In Victoria, you know, we are engaged in a period of huge transformative reform in mental health. It's probably really only the second wave of transformative reform since the deinstitutionalisation reforms of the 1990s. And it's worth reflecting on that reform back then and what it achieved and what it didn't. And it achieved a lot. It was a human rights-led reform. It closed huge institutions, big symbols of actual perceived and actual power over people's lives, where people were literally locked up and spent significant periods of their lives because of their mental ill health. And those great, big, powerful buildings were closed, and it was a period of moving to more visibility in the community. And so there were many important things about those reforms, but they didn't achieve everything. In 2007, when I was working in Victorian government in the area of mental health, talking to lots of consumer groups and carer groups at the time, there was a strong view that we had picked up the culture from those institutions and brought it with us. We'd created new structures, we'd created new services, but in many cases, maybe not in all, we'd brought that culture of power and dominance into those new structures. And I think that is one of the big challenges of this reform, which is how do we change some of that culture and how do we change some of those power relationships? And I think the role of people with lived experience in leadership and participation is the potential big game changer. But it's also worth remembering that changing culture and practice is probably the hardest part of any single transformative change. And I think one of the ways that I often, that I think about describing this is encapsulated in a really great quote from Marshall McLuhan, who was a great American communicator. And he says, "Fish did not discover water. In fact, because they are completely immersed in the water in which they live, they are unaware of its existence. Similarly, when a conduct is normalised by a dominant cultural environment, it becomes invisible." So dominant cultures are invisible because they exist through the way we do what we do all day, every day. And it is often incumbent on people outside those dominant cultures to constantly call them out and try and change the power relationships and those cultures. So that's one of our biggest challenges. And it's really encouraging to see lived experience as a central theme of all the current major pieces of mental health reform: the Productivity Commission report, the National Suicide Prevention Strategy, Vision 2030, and the Royal Commission report. The Royal Commission report itself has commitments to lived experience woven through 74 different recommendations. And they are well aligned with the strategy that we are launching today. But to actually bring those to life, not have them sit alongside a dominant culture, but actually start to shake it up a bit, make it a bit uncomfortable, think about how we work together in different ways, is going to take leadership, it's going to take partnerships, it's going to take more than lip service, and it's going to need action at all different parts of the system. And I think it's incumbent on all of us, particularly those of us in leadership, to both understand and drive this change for those, and for those of us who do not have lived experience, to take on the role of allies. So our commitment to delivering not only a whole of organisation strategy for lived experience, but a system leadership role in relation to lived experience reflects our view that we need to do more than the status quo. It calls for us to work at multiple levels of the organisation, of the system that we are part of, to engage different voices and experiences and deliver across multiple platforms, to set up new targets and new ways of thinking and working. And these are easy things to say and not always easy things to do, because we all have the water that we're swimming and living in. For that reason, the strategy goes beyond rhetoric and strong rhetoric, and is structured around 4 pillars: leadership and culture, which is the underpinning thing that will bring all the others about; design and decision making; workforce development; innovation and influence. And I do consider that first pillar of the structure as the most critical one to enable meaningful change to come from the other 3. I am delighted that Katherine Whetton has joined us today, and I'll introduce her properly in a moment. But I think the work the department is doing to try and bring the voice of lived experience into all the reform is equally important and shows great leadership, but it will be incumbent on many of us across the system to embrace some of the changes in culture, in power sharing, in relationships that are going to be fundamental to bringing the voice and the knowledge and the expertise of people with lived experience to fundamental transformative change, not just change of structures, services, service models, service deliverers. All of those are important, but they will just bring old cultures into new places unless we really do understand how we change some of these things to get different outcomes. So I do want to thank the Mind staff, the consumers, the carers, the families, the partners, many of you whom are here, who've contributed to the development of the strategy. Your contribution has been invaluable, but it will be more invaluable in how we implement and bring it to life. I particularly want to thank Katie Larsen, who has really lived and breathed this and been the essence of great lived experience leadership here at Mind to bring this about. And I want to thank all of you for being here today, because this does need to be part of a broader conversation, a broader process. This isn't just about what we do here at Mind. It's about how we play our part in that broader system to bring about some transformative change. So I am delighted that Katherine has joined us, and I would like to introduce her formally. She is the Deputy Secretary of Mental Health and Wellbeing in the Victorian Department of Health, and in this role she is leading that very ambitious mental health reform agenda, including the implementation of the recommendations of the Royal Commission, as well as continued stewardship of the mental health alcohol and other drugs services sectors. Katherine and I have worked together in the past, particularly when she was the Deputy Secretary, Policy, Strategy and Performance in the Victorian Department of Education and Training. She's got a great track record of embracing new reforms, so no pressure, Katherine, but we've got high expectations of you, as I know you will have of yourself. So many thanks for prioritising this for us today. Thank you for being with us, and I will hand over to you.
Thanks, Jill, for the very warm welcome. It's really lovely to have the opportunity to be here with everyone. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands we're dialing in from today. For me, that's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to recognise people with a lived and living experience of trauma, neurodiversity, mental health challenges, psychological distress, suicide, substance use or addiction, and their families, carers and supporters, those experiencing bereavement, advocates and allies. And it is really great to be here today and be part of the launch of Mine's lived experience strategy. And it is a strong focus for us in the Department of Health, and recognising that lived experience and working with people with lived experience is really about that key strategic partnership. It's not about stakeholders. Next slide, please. Thank you. And so when we think about people with lived experience as strategic partners, people with lived experience of mental illness or psychological distress, and those with lived experience as a carer, family member or a supporter, they do need to be involved in the design and delivery of services that impact them. And we know that that hasn't always been the case we've been talking about already today. And one of the most significant changes that the Royal Commission reports do talk about is that change and the placement of lived experience at the centre of our work. And I've just popped up there a quote from the Minister for Mental Health. I think it does encapsulate pretty well the idea that if we are to truly reform our system in a way that makes the most meaningful impact, that we do need to work with and listen to people with lived experience. Next slide. And so here, of the 74 recommendations that were made across the interim and final reports of the Royal Commission, there are many that talk to developing models of care or integrating services or creating new services where they're needed and currently don't exist. And so just on this slide, I've included some of the initiatives that really call for a lift or really call out lived experience leadership. And when I look then at the 4 pillars of Mine's lived experience strategy and how these have been distilled from the evidence that you've talked about, it's really clear that you're aiming much higher than talking about lived experience participation, but it's really about, again, that partnership with lived experience. And I do think that reflects a lot of what we heard from the Royal Commission, and certainly what we are seeking to do through our work in the department. Next slide. Now this is, and just I will make a point about structure. Jill talked before, I don't often put a slide with organisational structures up on a presentation, but I am particularly proud of the Mental Health and Wellbeing Division and the operating model and the structure that we've designed in the division, so that we do have lived experience roles in our leadership, executive leadership structure. So of all of that structure there, over on the left-hand side, you can see our lived experience branch. And you can see too that the lived experience branch will be led by an executive director, Mary O'Hagan, many of whom you'll know. For those who aren't familiar with Mary and her experience, she is internationally recognised for her lived experience expertise, and she's been an executive and an advocate. She's the former Mental Health Commissioner of New Zealand, and very excitingly, Mary starts with us on Monday. So we're delighted to have Mary come on board, and I think if anything, we've just got to make sure we support her very well and don't get so excited that she's here that we overburden her. You can see in the structure too, we've got 2 lived experience director roles, so from a carer perspective and consumer perspective, and we're currently recruiting for those director roles. And the lived experience branch, it plays a really important advisory role in the division and then across the department. So to be sure that we're bringing lived experience to everything that we do. The branch also, though, is leading implementations of some of the Royal Commission recommendations. And so, for example, that's the new lived experience residential service and the family and carer-led centres as well. So just a couple of examples of some of the lead projects that they have. And then having a lived experience branch for us, it is a really key part of building our internal lived experience capability and then supporting, if we can, the broader mental health sector as we do identify some of the system issues and challenges that exist from a lived experience perspective. And so we recognise that also that lived experience capability development, it is everybody's responsibility in the division. So while we do have a structure and we've got people in boxes, we're really trying to build that capability. So whether our teams are working on outcomes frameworks or data collection, different service design aspects, that it is about trying to bring that to everything that we do and that it is everyone's responsibility. But really delighted that we have that dedicated, designated leadership as well. And just to touch on the point that Jill made before, I completely agree that structures, organisational charts, programs, different documents alone won't get us there. It is really about how we think about our work and the conversations that we have with each other. So I just wanted to emphasise that, you know, having some of those building blocks in place, but then it really is about how we think about our work and undertake our work. Next slide. Thank you. And so then in addition, so on the left-hand side, looking at the internal capability that we are trying to build in the division for lived experience, we're also working with a number of external groups as well. And so this slide just gives a sense of some of the internal and external lived experience advisory groups and teams and organisations that we have and that we will continue to work with as part of our work, and I expect that this will evolve over time and grow. I won't talk to each of the things on the slide, but just a couple of points on the groups that we have built lived experience across all levels of our governance and reform work, and there is an important mix of internal and external groups. And we do see that important because, as I said before, building the capability across our team internally and needing to draw on that, but also we absolutely need to keep drawing on the experience and expertise of those across the sector and the system. And then for some of our internal and external groups, we do use a co-chairing arrangement wherever we can as well. And so, for example, and I think the meeting is underway right now, our lived experience advisory group is chaired by Tandem, VMIAC and the department. So I think it's the first tri-chair arrangement I've seen, but it's really great to have the mix of chairs for that group. And also just want to touch on a couple of other things that you'll be familiar, no doubt, with our lived experience engagement framework that supports our co-production, co-design and consultation processes in the department. The framework was first developed and released in 2019, and we're actually about to update it to be sure that it still is fit for purpose following and in light of the Royal Commission's inquiry. We're also being informed by Victorian Government's recently released human-centred design playbook, and that sets out various methodologies for good engagement. So that's something that we're looking at as well. We've got the lived experience participation registers that we run in partnership with Tandem and VMIAC, and we're also in the process of scaling them up to meet the demand. We're really conscious that as the reform agenda is really getting off the ground, we are wanting to use those participation registers a lot and making sure that they're scaled up, and also then recognising that supporting the development of lived experience leadership, we're developing a leadership capability framework for those registers, and that's really to try and help support consumers and carers who may want to develop their skills further. And then, of course, we've got VMIAC and Tandem as our lived experience peak bodies, and we're working really, really closely with them on the reform agenda. And then just to touch on organisations like Mind and just how critical to the success of the reform that Mind is. So we know just how well recognised and well valued that you are in the community and long-standing service delivery in mental health. And so I did want to say thank you for all of the work that you're doing, and there's so much that wouldn't possibly be able to list it all, but just really appreciate the different programs and services that you deliver. And as we move forward in our planning and delivery of the Royal Commission's recommendations, it will be really critical that we are working with Mind and other organisations as well. And just in the context of what's brought us together today, I did want to just highlight the strong connection that Mind does have to consumers, families, carers and supporters. And it really is about, you know, this connection and what they're telling us about how we can shape our work really well into the future. So I'll stop there. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk today. Thanks for having me, and really looking forward to continuing to work with Mind and on the big reform journey ahead. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Katherine. Really appreciate you coming along today, and fantastic to hear about the work that's happening. And we are very, very interested and enthusiastic to work with you going forward also. So thanks so much for your time. As Katherine mentioned, VMIAC and Tandem are co-chairing the Lived Experience Advisory Group. So Marie Pugh, the CEO of Tandem, and Craig Wallace, the CEO of VMIAC, weren't able to be here live today, but I had an opportunity to have a conversation with them both prior to today to hear from them like what they see as the key components are of reform, and how we can think collaboratively across the sector, how to support that from a consumer, family and carer perspective. So that we'll play that for you now. So thank you both so much for joining us today. So we have Marie Pugh from Tandem and Craig Wallace from VMIAC. I really appreciate you making some time to support us with the launch of the Lived Experience strategy. It's such an important time for us all in Victoria and more broadly around reform. And I just want to say thank you to both your organisations for the work that you've done leading up to the Royal Commission in Victoria particularly, and also of course in the rollout of the recommendations. So I wanted to invite you both to respond to the question, what are the most important considerations for achieving meaningful reform through the voices and perspectives of lived experience? And Marie, if I could invite you to speak first.
Thank you, Katie. It's a very big question and a very short time to answer it, so I'm going to do my best. I guess that the main thing is the authorising environment that the final report of the Royal Commission gives us. So I think one of the most important things are the things that the final report called out. So it called out a number of things like the over-reliance on medication as treatment, and that a range of therapeutic interventions will be funded. That's extremely important. It heralds a shift from a dominant individualistic biomedical focus to a whole of person, whole of family and whole of life approach. It also refocuses care in the community, which is, I guess, where Mind comes in. And also, the Commission makes a number of recommendations to elevate the experiences, expertise and perspectives of consumers, families, carers and supporters, so that together they're at the centre of the mental health and wellbeing services and the reform process. So that's throughout. You know, it's really clear from this final report that consumers and their families, carers and supporters are involved in the design, in the governance, in the evaluation. There are accountability measures. There's reference to the fact that services are accountable to consumers and their families and supporters. This is all really new. And this is probably the most powerful message that can be sent to the sector, that things have changed or the world has changed. And now I think organisations like Mind, with your new strategy as well, will be able to get back involved in the work that you were once doing and where you were supporting families and carers as core business. But that, of course, changed with the advent of the NDIS and all of the changes in the system. So I think that the most important thing, and the other thing I think, is the consumer and family carer supporter workforce, which is really going to grow. And I think that we often lived experience workforce. We think of it as consumer workforce, but it will be both. And that's really exciting for us. So our members feel as though our campaign landed, the Commission has heard, and the final report says it all. So it's very exciting.
Fantastic. Thanks, Marie. And I think we're all ready for the world to change and to see so much change through our services and through our sector more broadly. Craig, can I invite you to share your thoughts on what the most meaningful aspects of reform will be from a VMIAC perspective?
Thanks, Katie, and thank you, Marie, for your comments there. And first of all, I think to mind, congratulations on the strategy, and because this part of my answer about meaningful involvement in reform is answered in some ways by strategy, which connects work up and enables accountability for work. It provides a vision for work, and it says this work matters, that it really matters. So I just want to congratulate you on the strategy, and to say that that those things are really important in the reform. As Marie said, that people with lived experience and consumers and family carers and supporters to being at the centre of this reform. But I think what we're seeing happen more than just being at the centre of the reform is that people with lived experience needing to drive this reform. And as Marie said, to be involved in all aspects of it, from the very beginning, from the inception of the work, right through to the evaluation of the work, because people with lived experience are the people who are the direct service users, as we know, of the services, and are able to make very, very meaningful contributions about how it can change, and they have done so in the Royal Commission, and need to continue to do so in the implementation. And I would, as Marie said, consumers and families have spoken about what services they would like, and for people who are interested who haven't seen the VMIAC declaration, this is a set of a document including a set of word clouds about what consumers are looking for in their care, and it's not the technical aspects that belong to a particular discipline or profession. It's about things that they would like to see going on, including peer support, and obviously the lived experience workforce is so important. So for this reform to actually make changes, and I think to move away from business as usual, and I'm talking to you, government, about this, that we do need to see some different ways of doing governance, so that we're going to see different ways of doing commissioning of services, and the accountability frameworks for those. So there's a few things that are exciting that are happening, like the local services and also the interim regional boards as well, and they'll contribute to that.
Thanks, Craig. I do have one additional question that I'd like to sort of hear from you both on, if I may, which is just around as mine goes forward with this work, and I guess speaking on behalf of the service provider, of all service providers really, if there's sort of one key focus to keep in mind, or one key aspect you think that we need to take forward to really be successful in both delivering the types of services that we need, but also ensuring that we're continuing to advocate for the type of change that we think we need across the sector. Is there anything that you could offer to us as an organisation, or to more broadly others who are here today from other organisations, that you would like us to be aware of and know? Craig,
do you want to go?
I think being responsive is the very best thing you can do to consumers, so people with consumer lived experience, and so doing that quickly. You do need to do it carefully as well, but to do it quickly, to give that feedback. So for consumers to give heartfelt, become vulnerable and give heartfelt input into particular things that are happening, and then not hear for 3 months is not acceptable. And so it's responsive, which sends a message. What you said matters. We've taken it on board. We've integrated it. And by the way, while I'm saying all this, I'm sort of sounding like that information is taken away without people from lived experience. People with lived experience need to be doing the thinking work as well as that contributing to whatever participation opportunities are set up. So that's my answer for today.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Craig. And such an important piece of advice and feedback. Marie, over to you.
Thank you. I, of course, agree with everything that Craig has said. Additionally, though, I think that we need to think really carefully about what we're talking about when we use terms like engagement. Often we use terms like engagement, co-production, co-design as salt and pepper, but we actually don't understand what's behind those terms. So I'd encourage all the organisations to read the lived experience engagement framework that we were all involved, VMIAC and Tandem, and many stakeholders was involved in writing, and that underpins a lot of the thinking of the final report of the Royal Commission, and also a recognition that VMIAC and Tandem are recognised there as the two peaks in mental health that need to be involved throughout the reform process. And so we want to engage, we want to help, we want to be part of the solution. We don't have all the answers, but we are a link. We have registers that we run. So we would love to work in partnership with you. And I think it's about authenticity. I really do. We can get through anything as long as we're honest and open. We don't expect anything to be perfect, but at least if you can say, this is where we're at, this is what we want to do, what do you think? We can all sit down, build the table together, as Craig has said more than once, and work together.
Fantastic. Very, very keen to build the table together. So thank you both so much. Really appreciate your time and your contribution, and really looking and your contribution more broadly across the sector and across reform. And really looking forward to working with you as we go forward.
Thank you, Katie.
Fantastic. All right. So what we're going to do now is build on some of what we've heard from Marie and Craig there with our panel discussion about what will meaningful reform look like. And I'm so delighted and excited by the panelists we have to share this conversation with us today. So firstly, I'd like to invite, I'm going to invite each of the panelists to talk a little bit about what's brought them to this work. So I'll come to you first, Louise. So Dr. Louise Byrne, who I'm sure so many of us know and are aware of your work as a thought leader in lived experience workforce development. So Louise, firstly, congratulations on the launch of the National Peer Workforce Guidelines yesterday, a fantastic event yesterday as well. So a great week for lived experience all round. Can I invite you to talk a little bit about yourself and your work and what brings you to it?
Absolutely. Thanks, Katie, and thanks for having me. First, I'd just like to acknowledge that I'm on beautiful Dalrymple country. I'd like to thank I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and those still emerging. And I promise to walk softly on this land with respect for the ancestors and for all First Nations people. So what brought me to this work was late last century. I started working in youth roles with other young people. I was only 18 when I first started, and I worked mostly in First Nation-led organisations. And I always drew on my lived experiences of homelessness, suicide, drug and alcohol, mental health, hospitalisation, and many other things. And then in 2005, in a light bulb moment, I bumped into the concept of peer support and designated lived experience work. So I started my first designated role way back then. And over time, I was fortunate enough to train in intentional peer support with Sherry Mead and Chris Hansen, work in peer support roles, work in systemic advocacy roles, work in education and training across both NGOs and the government sector. And the thing that I found across all the roles was that how effective I was able to be, regardless of what my position was or what the setting was very much dependent on the attitudes and the beliefs of the people around me. So about 12 years ago, I started my PhD, and since then I've spent the last 12 years just digging into research on the lived experience workforce, and certainly trying to look at how do we support the workforce better, but also with a strong emphasis on how do we advocate, how do we bridge so that people in non-lived experience roles, in more traditional roles, colleagues and managers and HR personnel see the value of this work and are willing to engage with it. So that's a big motivator for me.
Thanks so much, Louise. Looking forward to hearing more from you through the discussion. I'll come to you now, Simon. So Simon Katterl, who is a consumer workforce member, worked across community development, advocacy, regulation and law reform, and most recently, or perhaps not most recently, but certainly of significance, consulted into the Royal Commission and with a particular interest around human rights. So welcome, Simon, and what brings you to this work?
Hi, thanks so much. Can you hear me? Can you hear me all right there? Yeah, great. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I'm on Wurundjeri country and pay my respects to elders past and present. And just take the opportunity to remind us all that First Nations wisdom is going to be essential to integrating and implementing strategies like this. I'm sure that's on the cards for Mind already. And a special thank you to Auntie Daike for that welcome to country. So congratulations on the wonderful body of work. I think it's really exciting that you're doing this. And I also want to highlight and thank Jill Callister for highlighting the need for strong advocacy to call out cultures of practice that are going to be one of the major barriers in us realising the reform agenda. I also want to acknowledge that it's a really difficult reform agenda for the Department of Health to implement. The timeframes are really tight. And if I can say one thing, from the conversations I've had, a lot of people, I won't say I'm representing, but a lot of people with lived experience would be okay for us to take a little more time than is on the books to make sure that we get this right. And I also want to acknowledge that there's a lot of power in methodologies like human-centered design. But when we talk to the consumer and carer communities, there's a real focus on co-design and co-production because those methodologies explicitly talk about power and they explicitly talk about decision making and treating people with lived experience as equal decision makers. So I guess what brings me to the work, so I've got my own lived experience of mental health issues, and that's definitely what connected me later in life to this sector. I've worked in consumer, mental health, human rights and regulatory agencies. What kind of emerged from me from all of these roles is this profound and unavoidable gap between the law and the lived experience of the law. I saw far too regularly a system that was completely detached from its responsibilities. And so I'm worried about that gap, and I'm hoping in working alongside lots of comrades that are here and elsewhere that we can build a system that is structurally and culturally incapable of violating human rights. So that's something that we've got ahead of us, but that's definitely the work that I'm interested in.
Thanks so much, Simon. And now to Lisa Sweeney. Lisa, thank you for joining us. Lisa brings personal experience and work across policy over many years to working towards a public mental health system that is equitable, accessible and therapeutic, and sits on the board at Tandem and also Australians for Mental Health. So Lisa, welcome, and what brings you to this work?
Hello, thanks Katie. And I just want to acknowledge I'm also on beautiful Wurundjeri country and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And the heavy rain has just started, which is also quite nice. So I guess what brings me to this work is that personal experience. So having immediate family members and I guess being raised in a caring or a supportive role from day dot. I also have some of my own lived experience, which has joined me along the way. And I think those two sets of experiences or those two paradigms very much frame my engagement with this sector on a day-to-day basis. So I'm incredibly passionate about lived experience and I guess providing cultures that support people to use that lived experience. I definitely believe that the best people to design and work within a system are the people who are using it. So I'm really looking forward to today's discussion. I think, you know, I'm also really interested in, there's so much reform activity happening here in Victoria, and that's incredibly exciting for all of us who live in Victoria, but there are also people that I care about in various other parts of the country. So very interested and excited to see how they might be able to learn from what we are doing here, and absolutely thrilled by the work of Louise and others in the release of the national guidelines yesterday. But yes, very much looking forward to the discussion.
Great, thank you all so much. All right, well, we will kick off into the discussion, and we're going to focus the discussion around both, broader reform, but picking up on some of the key themes that we see within our strategy as the key drivers of change. So I'm going to start with one of the big ones, which is leadership. And Louise, I'll come to you. Interested to hear around your thoughts around lived experience leadership, what it actually means, and how we can create pathways that enable it.
Okay, thanks, Katie. So I think there's two key things with leadership. One, if people around those leaders don't respect and accept those perspectives as being valid, then you can be in whatever type of role you like, but there's not going to be the impact. The other thing is that the role needs to have authority. So, I mean, impact is the end result, I believe, of any leadership position. And what you need is buy-in, cooperation, collaboration, respect, and acceptance from everyone around you, whether they're in a lived experience role or not, as well as the authority to, put dollars to things, to put policies to things, and to actually make the perspective that you represent count for something in the actual practical real world. So how do we do that practically? One, of course, we need lived experience leaders at all levels and all settings. So we need lived experience leaders at all levels of all organisations and of the sector more broadly, including, of course, our government organisation. And what Katherine was outlining today is just so exciting, because obviously the department is taking this very seriously. The sorts of things that Jill was raising, which I really applaud what she was saying earlier around culture. So it's ensuring that, because again, you can put people in these positions, but if you don't have a whole of workforce approach to shifting culture, which, I mean, culture is just beliefs and attitudes, isn't it, right? So if you walk into an organisation and people fundamentally are not aligned with what drives lived experience, and or they don't understand it, they don't know what it is, they haven't been brought into the conversation, they can find it frightening, they can find it strange, they can think that it's some sort of mandated token thing, some trendy thing for the moment, and they're not going to engage in any kind of meaningful way. So what we need is whole of sector education. We need our mental health professions to include lived experience led education in every single bachelor's degree in the country. We need to make sure that the people who are coming out into the workforce understand what lived experience does and is, what does it uniquely bring, how to operate effectively with lived experience workers and lived experience leaders. We also need retraining for everybody who's already in the sector. This is not just about a workforce, this is about a paradigm shift. And the way that we make that paradigm shift is we completely reconfigure the way that we view what is valuable knowledge. And the only way we can do that is with really comprehensive education and re-education, and to the creation of tangible positions that demonstrate the value of this work, and put your money where your mouth is, as Mind is doing. Good on you. I'm sticking to my 3 minutes, so that's all I'll say.
Thanks, Louise. That was a pretty dynamic 3 minutes, I have to say. And it sort of leads us into the next question I wanted to ask you, Lisa, which is around decision making. So a key approach of change is to ensure consumers, carers and families are involved in meaningful ways in decisions that affect them and actually have power and authority and influence in those decisions. How can we do that better? How can we engage with consumers, carers and families beyond our usual systems and approaches to actually enable new ways to do that? And picking up again on what Craig said earlier, to build the table together.
Yeah, amazing. I think we can just close the webinar now. Louise has done such an amazing job kicking us off. And I think, both Jill and Louise have mentioned already this notion of the importance of cultural change within the workforce in our sector. And I think when it comes to engagement, meaningful engagement, I'm so glad that that word is in there, meaningful engagement with carers and families. I think, we are all relational beings, and I think we all operate within a social context. And I think something that's really important for our workforce working in our mental health sector to understand is to, I guess, operate from a central place of asking themselves whether the care and support they are providing is and the system that they are working in is befit of what they would expect for themselves or what they would expect for the people around them, the people that they care about. And I think if we could somehow encourage people to operate from that starting place, I think that cultural change would follow. I think when it comes to engagement with carers and families in particular, I think we really need to broaden the understanding of what it is when we mean, when we're talking about carers and families. So often that is determined from trying to pinpoint what someone's family of origin is, or if they have a spouse, or who their parents are. But for a lot of people, that might not be the best support place for them. So really allowing a system that allows consumers to identify who their support network is and engaging with them is a great place to start. So really carer and family identification are mandated. So we've seen that, I think Marie touched on this, and we've also seen it in the Royal Commission's recommendations, but having some accountability measures built in around that so that carer identification does happen. It's not okay to ask it as a fleeting question or just leave it as an unticked box on some paperwork. It needs to be built in to every incident of care and support. And I think another thing that can help facilitate this is improving continuity of care. So when we have support teams that work with someone for a long time, they get to know that person's relational context and that person's social context. And I think, that is the side of it that will help someone accessing service, help someone with lived experience who is accessing care. But the other side of it is more of our system dials. So we talk a lot about lived experience roles at, throughout the system. It's from governance to governance and oversight, to delivery of care, to design of care, to advisory committees throughout the system. But it's important, as Marie has already pointed out, to ensure that that is, there's consumer lived experience roles, but there's also carer lived experience roles as well. So broadening and deepening the carer lived experience roles as part of that.
Fantastic. Thanks, Lisa. And I think that, a couple of comments there around just thanks for raising the importance of continuity of care. But I think that question about is this a system we want for ourselves, and is this a system we want for our families and our loved ones, is such an important question. Simon, in your consulting role with the Royal Commission, part of your focus was a system informed by human rights. In what we're seeing so far in terms of the reforms, are they reflecting this approach? And I guess how do you see that we can continue to develop that, or see change or different approaches to what we're seeing?
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, so I was hired as a consultant on a contract basis and giving a range of perspectives, consumer and also human rights. And yeah, so where we're at now, fast forwarding to now, what do we have in terms of human rights? I guess the most authoritative guidance on human rights would be the CRPD and the CRPD committee, and there's a range of human rights that we could talk to, but one that's really clear is that the CRPD committee said that all forms of involuntary mental health treatment breach human rights. The recommendations from the Royal Commission don't change that. They call for a reduction in the use of compulsory treatment and the elimination of restrictive practices in 10 years. So we've got a fair way to go in terms of shaping the debate. So it's and the policy agenda. So it is more aligned to human rights, but it's what we have right now. And I still think that there's a lot of hope in the current reform agenda for change. I suppose there's two things that I think are within the context of today's conversation crucial to address to make that a reality. The first is, and for anyone who hears me talk, they'll roll their eyes, but the first is that we need a dramatic improvement in the regulatory oversight of the system. So under the current regimes, we've had systemic human rights breaches. We've had over 12,000 complaints and inquiries, and we've had 0 known compliance notices. So that's 0 times that the regulator has said, you've breached the law and you need to follow the law. 12,000 complaints, 0 compliance notices. We've had systemic regulatory failure. And if any of these strategies or policies or laws are going to take effect, we need to change that culture in a regulatory sense going forward. The second is that we have to build real alternatives. And so, you know, the local area and mental health and wellbeing services and frameworks are a real opportunity to do that. But we need to make sure we don't collapse into more of the same. So these services really need to be grounded in community mental health and peer-led organisations. You know, there's already an enormous investment coming out of the Royal Commission in clinical mental health services, but it's time for some equity in funding to push towards peer-led mental health services and community mental health services like Mind Australia, because we know that those services have a culture that's far closer to human rights, and there's definitely always going to be issues and challenges, but are far closer to the kind of human rights abiding system that consumers want than we find in clinical mental health services. So we need to shift some of the funding and make sure that there's real equity for community and peer-led services in that particular aspect of the reform agenda.
Thanks so much, Simon. I'm going to move us to thinking about workforce now. And one of the things we sought to do within our strategy was to really think about psychological safety around disclosure and the value of lived experience more broadly, while also growing our designated lived experience workforce and retaining the integrity of those roles as distinct and interrelated with the discipline of lived experience. Lisa, I'm just interested to hear your perspectives firstly on how do we navigate those tensions about both the broader lived experience safety and disclosure while also retaining that integrity?
Such a good question, and I think it's really important to acknowledge that people bring many sets of experiences to the table and to their work, and so we do operate in a climate where people of all professions, all different qualifications, are drawn to the mental health sector because they bring their own lived experience, but do not necessarily operate in a designated lived experience role. And then, as we've acknowledged, through the importance of this strategy and other work that has come before it, it's also really important to have designated roles so that someone working within that role is free to perform within a lived experience framework. So yes, the tension does exist, and I feel like acknowledging the tension is a really good start. We've talked a lot about culture already, and I think that creating a culture that promotes the inclusion and safe disclosure across all workplaces is important, and throughout all levels. I think previously there's been a sense that people within leadership roles can't disclose their lived experience, where that is just completely ridiculous. If ever there is a tier of an organisation where it's important to have a lived experience understanding, it is at the top. So if we must operate within hierarchical structures, but that's a whole separate other rant. I think I'm really interested in this concept of workforce mutuality. So this idea that, ensuring that a workplace is reflective of the population that it serves. So by that notion, we should have a thriving lived experience workforce to really truly understand and meet the needs of the population it's serving. We've talked a lot about the importance of having designated lived experience roles within service design, delivery, governance, in government, and obviously there's some great work happening already in that space, but there's definitely room to grow, and as I said at the outset, room for this to broaden outside of Victoria as well. I think when we talk about that tension, I think having a culture, again, of openness and curiosity, but also compassion. So I don't think you can ever, or you should ever, assume that you understand the limits of someone's experience. So just because someone hasn't disclosed doesn't mean that they don't hold that experience. So I think if we operate from a place of compassion in all of our interactions, and a place of openness. So just because someone hasn't disclosed yet doesn't mean that they might not tomorrow. But we know that stigma means that people might not feel safe to disclose. So, and nor should they have to. So I think, yeah, I guess my main points are having lived experience, designated lived experience at every role, so that there is that designated place for that expertise to be brought in, but also, I guess, being comfortable that we have a common goal. Everyone working within this sector has a common goal. And if we have a culture of, sorry, I have not had much sleep and it is making me incredibly inarticulate, but this is the life of having an 8-month-old. I'm usually marginally more articulate than this, so please bear with me. I hope you all know what I'm trying to say, which is just that we really need that culture of openness and compassion, and to believe that everyone involved in our sector is here for the right reasons, and to, I guess, educate with compassion when we feel that someone has it wrong. That is all I will say for now.
Thanks, Lisa, and doing an incredible job. So thank you so much, particularly experiencing sleep deprivation. So Louise, I wanted to come to you to talk a bit more about workforce, and I know the incredible contribution you've made to the evidence around workforce development. There's a question in this about influence. So we're talking about lived experience in different levels of organisations and having different opportunities to contribute to decision making. Peer workers are often the lowest paid within the mental health sector and operating as part of a broader workforce that doesn't hold a lot of power. How do we shift this? How do we create service models and practices which centre and amplify peer perspectives in the way that we work, so we can really truly have opportunities to deliver peer-led services more broadly?
Thanks, Katie. If I could just, I agree, Lisa. I think there were some really good points. I just wanted to say quickly that the research that we found, particularly in the US, that surprised me was that just having designated lived experience roles and well supported in an organisation didn't actually equate to automatically shifting the culture and making it a safer environment. What's actually required is intentional use of people in designated lived experience roles to create that safe space. And that also helps to address the tension, because you're respecting the role of designated lived experience. It's not in some way being sidelined. So that's just to follow on from that point. So obviously I've talked about the need for roles throughout the hierarchy of the organisation. That's one thing. And the other thing, yeah, well, this is not actually Alicia's research, Simon, but Alicia is actually doing some fabulous research as well. And that really supports the stuff Lisa was saying about the need for supervisors to be talking about their own experience, because that does create a really safe culture as well. So the things that we found, the other strategies were lived experience-led training from orientation on for all staff. It's also really important that the human resources staff are included in that, administration staff are included in that. So it's, again, a whole of workforce approach. Critical, repeat, repeat, repeat. So what we saw in some organisations that have great reputations internationally was that they thought they had their peer space sorted, they left it alone, and as Jill was alluding to earlier, the dominant culture reasserts itself. So that revisiting, shifting culture through formal training, informal conversation, ensuring that there are lived experience roles distributed throughout all of the different spaces in the organisation, that has to be addressed in an ongoing way. You also need proactively to address the issue of leadership from people from diverse perspectives. So you need people from diverse cultural backgrounds. You need to ensure that your inclusion is not just the way that you're advertising positions for people on the ground, but it's really important as well that you've got leadership roles that ensure that less heard voices are being heard, and in a meaningful way that allows for impact. The other thing is research. If you want to have influence, you need people in designated lived experience positions doing the research, designing the research, disseminating the research, reporting the research. And until we have that, there's always going to be, I believe, a slant towards non-lived experience or more clinical perspectives. And I think co-production has its limitations when it comes to particularly to research or to training and to design. And you really need to have lived experience leadership as well as other forms of co-production in producing the research that informs what we believe is evidence and then build the system on.
Thanks so much, Louise. And so critical. I mean, we've seen so many different examples of this too, I think, where we see peer perspective sort of being devalued and or getting swamped by the dominant culture. I mean, the NDIA targeted peer workers paying $20 an hour less than support coordination, but had the same functions. And I think this is the kind of thing we see again and again. Simon, I wanted to just see if you had any comment on this particular area as well, in terms of ways that we can support that growth of the peer workforce and influence.
I think just the one thing I sort of my expertise on this dwarfs is dwarfs. It's small, a lot smaller. That's what I'm trying to say. Louise's, but surprise, surprise. I think regulation is quite useful in this context. You know, and I use an example of the Victorian government's done a really good job on the Gender Equality Act. Creating a new infrastructure to deal with inequality in the workplace. We don't talk about the lived experience workforce through a lens of inequality, and that inequality is in lots of respects unjustifiable, most respects unjustifiable. And so I think that there's a role for government to have oversight of these strategies. You know, Mine's lived experience strategy. There's going to be a new mental health and wellbeing commission. We need to have some agency with visibility over all of these strategies. And I know that's really difficult at state and Commonwealth levels, but in Victoria, we need to have some agency with visibility so that these things are actually not just performative documents, but things that are being adhered to and really sort of shift the needle. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Simon. Now we have got a little bit longer with this wonderful group of very knowledgeable people. So I'd encourage you now, if you've got any questions, to pop them in the chat, and we will seek to answer as many of those as we can. So while you have an opportunity to think about that and pop them in, I've just got one additional question from me, which is, I think so commonly what we see is tensions between psychiatric perspectives, lived experience perspectives, and how do we actually work towards effective collaboration across a whole range of different perspectives that can allow for systemic change and more complexity and understanding around, you know, what we identify as different disciplines and how they can work together so that we can actually reform through collaboration. Is that possible, and how do we do that? Louise, I might come to you first.
Sure thing, Katie. Certainly in the national guidelines, we've looked at this a lot, and that was a big focus of a lot of the studies that I've been involved with. One of the really crucial things is to do that change management stuff. So if clinicians or other folk within the industry feel on the back foot, if they're left out of the conversation, or if they feel that there's implicitly some sort of criticism of their work and what they've done in the hiring of lived experience roles, and nobody does anything to massage that, there's no diplomacy and you know, bringing on board of people, then you're starting from a really bad foot to start with, and it creates professional defensiveness and what have you. Actually, what, you know, particularly the research we did in the States found is that clinicians in organisations where the lived experience workforce was adequately supported actually found that they enjoyed their roles more. They were able to focus more on discipline-specific skill sets rather than working in more generalist case management roles. They were excited about how their understanding of recovery and person-directed care had improved. They said that their ability to engage effectively in therapeutic relationships had gone through the roof. It had helped them question. But it was the having of the lived experience people around them in the designated roles that gently helped them to question the way that they had been trained to work. But in order to do that in the first place, you need to help people see that it's not a you know, them-us situation, and lived experience isn't brought in to make you feel bad about what you've been doing and that it's not enough. It's another tool on the tool belt. If you're a builder and you go to the work site, you're not going to leave, you know, your screwdriver at home. You need everything. You need everything at your disposal. People need different things from different folks, and it's is what makes up a multidisciplinary kind of, you know, workforce and environment. So the first step before you do anything else is talk to the people who are in the non-lived experience roles. That's right, exactly, Simon. But we do need, you know, everything is not a nail, and we have to help people see that this is about evolution. Another thing I say a lot is that, like in surgical techniques, right? We'd never get to a point, okay, well, we've done well enough there. We're not going to do any more explanation. We're gonna leave it as it is because people are feeling threatened that it's, you know, it's some sort of criticism of the work. No, of course not. We're always looking at how to improve things. Same with mental health, always looking at how to improve things. We know full well that we need better representation and understanding of what it's like to be that end service user. Lived experience roles do that incredibly well. It's really just about making sure that the rest of the workforce sees it as adding to their work experience in a range of ways, including making it safer for them if and when they experience mental health challenges, making their job situation, you know, more enjoyable and upskilled, particularly in line with reform, and of course, and most importantly, making it more effective for people on the ground who are accessing the service.
Thanks so much, Louise. And thank you to everyone for your comments as well. I have a question here from our Q&A. So sustaining the needed paradigm shift of culture and community organisations can be difficult with constant staff and leadership turnover, and dominant culture quickly reasserts itself. Has the panel any advice around long haul strategies to maintain this shift, as in the get past go and collect $200 approach? Lisa, did you have any comments on this in the first instance?
I love this question, and I know that it's a huge problem, well, across the sector, but also in our regional and remote areas in terms of how you actually maintain staff and therefore provide that continuity of care that people are so desperate for. I hope that the department is looking at this, and governments across Australia are looking at this. So, you know, getting past go and collecting $200 is not the worst idea in the world. I think there are other examples throughout our health system where we do attach incentives to different types of care provision. So I think it's a great idea. And I think also, you know, for a lot of people working within our system, they're actually not able to deliver the kind of care that they are trained to deliver or that they want to deliver, because there are so many pressures coming at them from across the system. So inherently we have a workforce that is not always satisfied because they're not able to do their jobs in the way that they want to do them. So I think a lot of this is about alleviating pressures on the system and creating a system that is thriving, obviously, to better serve the people accessing the system and the people supporting those people, but also importantly the people working within the system. I mean, my perspective is that we cannot talk about reform without also acknowledging that there are people that work within this system, and those people have wants, needs, desires, they're trained in particular ways, and whatever issues there may be with elements of that, it doesn't change that humans are dynamic, and if they are not happy, that is going to flow right on to the people that they're interacting with. So we have a vested interest in supporting them to be happy and work in an environment that is going to create better outcomes for everyone. So that's a long-winded way of saying I think creating incentives is a really good idea, and creating, again, outcomes measurements so that we can monitor when the system and individuals within the system are not performing well, and so that we can help retain our workforce.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you so much, Lisa. I'm sorry, just bear with me. I'm just finding another question here in the chat. From Mayor, how do we ensure that a diversity of lived experience is represented in this workforce? Sometimes these voices are curated and there is a right way to speak experience. Educating, training and reflection needed too amongst the lived experience workforce. So I think this is a really important question, particularly when we talk about lived experience leadership. How do we ensure that there's not sort of ways of falling into the right way of doing things that ultimately align with the dominant culture? Simon, did you have any comments on this?
Yeah, I think that's a hard one. I think that, and that tension emerges anywhere as any community kind of or group comes to prominence as well. There's a kind of a norm building process, and so I think it's a natural tension that we need to grapple with. But my sense is that that there's a really important role for peaks to cultivate environments for a community to understand history, but you also need flow through. You know, you need you want it to be a river with running water, not and I'm not saying that this is I'm on the board of VMIAC, but you don't want it to be a swamp where there's no water going through at the same time. And so I think that there's a big role for peaks in that situation. Yeah, I would. Yeah, I would probably leave it there because I reckon Louise is going to have, and Lisa will have better answers than me.
All right, we'll go to Lisa, and then we'll come to you, Louise.
I think it is a really difficult question to answer, but I do think that it's important to engage widely and provide different ways of engaging. When I think of some of the people closest to me who have such an incredible wealth of expertise to share, part of the barrier that stops them from contributing is that, you know, something like this is not something they would be comfortable with. Whereas if there were more opportunities to perhaps write something down, then that would be easier for them. That would be their preference. But often we see engagement is face-to-face, and for some people that's, you know, not the way that they want to engage. They would like to go away and think about it, take their time with it. So that's just one example, but I think providing different ways of engagement, and it kind of what Simon's saying also, of kind of ensuring that there is fresh water, that we're not just using the same voices, because there is so much diversity within the lived experience and the carer movements, that it's not homogenous. There's not just one set of experiences. So, you know, that's again why strategies like this are so important. We can't just rely on one or two or three people to represent the issues of millions in our country. So, yes.
Thanks, Lisa. I'm going to just I'm just going to read another question because I think it's a really important point. It's something we've tried to touch on, to address within our strategy by applying an intersectional lens, but it proves again, you know, it's the challenge of in a conversation about inequality and diversity. We haven't talked a lot about inequality within the lived experience movement. So how do we address inequality for priority populations such as LGBTIQA plus Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people of colour, refugees and asylum seekers? How do we look at diverse community-led lived experience strategies for inclusion and mental health reform? And it's always that challenge of progressing one movement, but then how do we address the minority within a minority? Louise, I know we've talked about this a little bit. I'd be really interested in your thoughts on this.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. So as I mentioned before, one of the things that needs to happen is proactively ensuring that leadership roles are being deliberately and intentionally given to people who come from diverse range of perspectives and backgrounds. So we need, of course, to ensure that the workforce is inclusive. And so again, in the national guidelines, what we've talked about are a range of strategies to promote the inclusion of folk. One of our biggest challenges always, particularly for people from diverse cultural backgrounds, is that the mainstream Western concept of mental health does not align, and in fact is inappropriate for so many other cultures, including First Nations people. So that's always a barrier. That's a barrier for the employment of people from diverse cultural backgrounds and you know, for other folk. Some really fabulous, so Brook Red is a fabulous organisation up in Brisbane. They're lived experience led. One of the things that they've done to ensure that they're bringing on folks who come from diverse you know, backgrounds and cultures is that they have policies which are, you know, for example, LGBTQIA plus friendly. They engage with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, and then they are very transparent about that work, so that the policies are advertised on their website, so that basically people know that this is a work environment in which they would be welcomed, in which their, you know, culture would be understood and respected. Some of the things that we've suggested again in the guidelines is that organisations look at ensuring that there's no barriers for people to attend cultural holidays, so that people don't need to take time off, you know, work they're able to participate meaningfully in their culture without having to find excuses, that the work understands that people have a dual role as the work role, but also as a member of that community, and that there's important work in, nurturing that community and the roles that they hold within that. So I guess it's similar to lived experience work more generally. It's about being intentional, it's about being proactive, it's about creating opportunity, and it's about remembering to have this on the agenda, that these are very important issues, and that up until now, lived experience workforce development has been a bit of a whitewash, frankly, and it's a gaping hole, and it's something that actually needs to be in the sort of top 5 things that every organisation or sector is addressing.
Thanks so much, Louise. We are coming to the end of our panel. I just wanted to note a couple of other comments about mentioning the role of young people, and so critical that when we're looking at diverse perspectives, we're engaging young people. And really appreciate, the discussion there at the end, that we have to really make sure we're constantly refocusing on all forms of inequality, even within inequality, and really appreciate your comments. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you so much to our guests who have been part of this discussion. It really sets a platform for us all to work from, and shows the incredible depth and knowledge that we have across this sector. So I really appreciate all of your time, and look forward to working with all of you in the future. And if we have shared the link to our strategy in the chat, please feel free to contact me directly if you want to talk more about it or hear more about it. And we'll keep pushing the agenda forward and see what kind of incredible change that we can make in the coming years. Thank you, everyone.